My son-in-law held up the cedar box I'd spent 3 months building in my garage, turned it once in his hands like he was checking it for damage, and set it on the edge of the gift table. Not among the other presents. On the edge. The way you'd set something you were already planning to move. That night, my daughter called me. Her voice was so thin I almost didn't recognize it. "Mom," she said, "the box. What did Dad put inside it before he?" She couldn't finish. I sat down on the kitchen floor, which is something I haven't done since my knees got bad, and I held the phone against my chest for a second before I answered her. "I'm going to tell you what was inside that box, and I'm going to tell you what happened when my son-in-law finally found out." Welcome to Strong Mom Stories. I'm Lenora Dix. I'm 67 years old, and for 32 years I taught woodworking at the vocational high school 2 towns over, which means I know what a dovetail joint is supposed to feel like when it slides home, and I know what a piece of furniture costs in hours before it ever costs $1. My husband Roy used to say I spoke fluent wood. He wasn't wrong. I can walk through a furniture store and tell you inside 30 seconds what's solid and what's veneer, what will outlast us and what won't make it to the next move. Roy passed 14 months before the graduation party. Pancreatic cancer, which is the kind that gives you just enough time to say everything you need to say and not one day more. He was 70 years old, and he spent the last clear weeks of his life sitting at the kitchen table in his robe, writing things down in a yellow legal pad in the cramped, particular handwriting that I had been reading for 43 years. I should tell you about Roy before I tell you about the box, because the box was Roy's idea down to the last detail, and you need to know who he was to understand what it meant. Roy was a tax accountant who looked like a man who should have been a carpenter. Big hands, patient eyes, the kind of quiet that fills a room rather than empties it. He was not a man who made speeches or bought flowers on ordinary days, but he was the man who noticed when the furnace was making a sound 2 weeks before it broke, and who had already called someone before I knew there was a problem. He paid attention. That was his love language, if you want to call it that. Attention, paid in advance, before you knew you needed it. He also, it turned out, had been paying another kind of attention for a very long time. About 10 days before he died, Roy asked me to bring him the locked steel box from the back of his sock drawer. I'd seen that box for 30 years. It was small and gray, and looked like the kind of thing that held a spare key or an old passport, so I'd never asked. When he opened it in front of me, sitting up in the hospital bed we'd rented for the living room, I understood I had been wrong about its size. It was full of stock certificates and a savings account passbook and a folded letter in Roy's handwriting, and another envelope sealed shut with a piece of tape that said, in Roy's cramped print, for Clem. Open at 25. Clem is our grandson. He was 18 at the time. He is the only child of our only daughter, Nora, who had Clem young and raised him mostly alone after the man she was with then decided fatherhood was not for him. Roy and I stepped in where we could. More than we let on, because Nora has her pride, which she gets from me, and you don't wound a person's pride when they're already doing their best. Roy had been building a fund for Clem since the boy was 3 years old. Not a college fund. Something else. He'd bought stock quietly, a few shares at a time, in companies he believed in, and he'd let them sit. He'd added to it every year on Clem's birthday, and every Christmas, and every time Roy had a good year and felt grateful. He'd never mentioned it to me beyond once, early on when he said, "That boy is going to need a foundation someday, and I intend to be part of it even when I can't be here." I hadn't known the details. I hadn't known how long or how much. Roy told me in the living room with the afternoon light coming through the curtains. He told me the approximate total, which I will tell you when the family heard it, the way I had to hear it, all at once sitting down. It was just over $60,000. Then Roy told me the part that was more important than the number. "Don't just hand him an envelope," he said. His voice was thin by then, but his eyes were clear the way they get when a person has already done their grieving and arrived somewhere past it. "Money in an envelope. He'll spend it on something he'll forget in 5 years, and he won't know where it came from. Put it somewhere he has to find. Make it a thing, Lenora. Make it something he has to open." He looked at me. Build him something, he said. You're the carpenter. Build him something he'll keep and put it inside and make sure he's the one who opens it. That was nearly the last project Roy ever assigned me, and I intended to do it exactly right. I started the box 6 weeks after the funeral, partly for Clem, and partly because I needed something to do with my hands that wasn't folding Roy's shirts or sitting in the too quiet kitchen. I went to the lumber yard and I bought a piece of figured walnut that cost more than I usually spend, because Roy would have said, spend the money, and I wanted to honor that. The box is 14 inches long, 9 inches wide, 5 inches deep. Dovetail corners, because those are the strongest, and because Roy always said if you're going to do a thing, do it so it lasts. I fitted it with brass hinges, a small brass latch, and a lock, a real one, not decorative, because Roy had wanted Clem to have to wait, and a lock is a promise in hardware form. In the lid, on the inside, I carved Roy's initials, R.E.D., for Roy Edward Dix, in the same blocky capitals he used when he signed his name. Small enough that you'd have to look. Big enough that once you saw them, you wouldn't unsee them. It took 3 months. My back made me pay for every hour of it. There were evenings I sat at the workbench and talked out loud to Roy, the way I do now, the way you do when someone is gone, and the habit of them is still in your mouth. I'm doing the hinges tonight, I'd say. You would have opinions about the hinges. He would have. He always did. On the inside bottom of the box, I built a false floor. A shallow hidden compartment, 1/2 inch deep, fitted so perfectly that you'd have to know it was there to find it, or you'd have to run your finger along the inside bottom and feel the seam. Into that compartment I fitted Roy's stock certificates, folded flat, and the savings account passbook, and the sealed letter to Clem, marked open at 25, and one more thing. A smaller envelope, unsealed, containing a note Roy had dictated to me in the living room. A note for the day the family first learned about the fund. He'd made me read it back twice. I fitted the false floor back in place. You could not see the seam unless you looked for it. Then, I wrapped the box in brown paper, tied it with a piece of leather cord from my workshop, and drove it to my daughter's house for her son's graduation party. I should tell you about my son-in-law because I want to be fair to him, even when being fair costs me something. Nora married Garrett 3 years ago. He is 38 years old, which is 4 years younger than Nora, which is the first thing his mother mentioned to me when we met, phrased as a compliment that wasn't. He sells commercial real estate, and he is very good at it in the particular way that requires a person to move quickly and trust surfaces and make decisions based on what something looks like rather than what it's made of. He is not a bad man. I have tried to see him clearly, and I believe that is true. He is a man who was raised by people who measure things in outcomes, and he measures things in outcomes, and it has made him successful and narrow in equal measure. He looked at my daughter the way you look at something valuable, which, in the early days, I was willing to accept as love. Over time, I understood it was closer to acquisition. Nora had made something of herself. A good job, a good home, a son she'd raised with more grace than she had any right to under the circumstances, and Garrett appreciated that the way you appreciate a well-located property. He was not unkind to Clem. He was correct, which is not the same thing, and Clem, who is a perceptive 18-year-old, knew the difference and kept his distance without making it a scene. Garrett had never liked the shop in my garage. He called it a hobby in a way that made the word feel small. He said it to people at dinner parties. Lenora does woodworking. It's her little hobby. And I'd watch Nora smile, the tight smile of a woman who knows something is wrong and has chosen, for now, to let it go. The first time he watched me carry something I'd made into their house, he said, "Oh, did you make that?" The way you'd say it about a child's school project. It was not malicious. It was something worse. It was automatic. He was going to be automatic at Clem's graduation party. I just didn't know yet how much that was going to cost all of us. The party was at Garrett's mother's house because she had the biggest yard and because Garrett's mother, Phyllis, is the kind of woman who makes offers that are actually requirements. The yard was decorated in Clem's school colors. There was a banner with his name in vinyl letters, and a table of catered food that had been arranged to be photographed, and a woman named Sandra from Garrett's office who spent the first hour telling people she'd recommended the caterer. Clem looked like what he is, a kid who'd worked very hard for 4 years and was genuinely happy about it and a little overwhelmed by the people who'd come to observe his happiness. He found me near the back fence early on and gave me the hug that is still partly the hug of the little boy I used to pick up from school, and he said, "Grandma, you made it," like there had been any possibility I wouldn't. I had my box under my arm. I decided not to put it on the gift table with the envelopes and the Amazon boxes. I was going to give it to Clem myself, in person, when there was a moment. I was going to tell him about the false floor and point him to the seam and watch him find it himself the way Roy had wanted. I looked for that moment all afternoon. The party moved the way parties at Phyllis's house always move. According to a schedule, only Phyllis knows, with Phyllis as the primary narrator. At 4 o'clock, she announced it was time for gifts, and Clem sat in a lawn chair in the middle of the yard, and people handed him things while Garrett stood next to Phyllis and said, "That's great," buddy, at intervals that had nothing to do with what was being opened. Nora found me and said, "Mom, you can give it to him now, while everyone's watching. He'd love that." She meant it kindly. She was proud of the box. She'd seen me working on it, and she knew enough about woodworking to know what it had cost me. She didn't know what was inside it. Roy had asked me to keep that part until the moment. So I handed the box to Clem, who held it in both hands the way you hold something when the weight of it tells you it's real. And I said, "Your grandfather wanted me to build you something. There's more to it than the outside. Make sure you open it all the way." He smiled. He ran his thumb over the brass latch. He said, "Grandma, this is incredible," and that is when Garrett picked up the box. Clem had set it on his knee to work the latch, and Garrett reached over and lifted it, not to look at it, but to show Phyllis. "Lenora made it," he said. "She does woodworking." The tone was the same tone he always used. The polite anthropological interest of someone who finds a native craft mildly diverting. Phyllis turned it over once. She looked at the bottom. She was looking, I think, for a label. "Very rustic," she said. "Very handmade," Garrett agreed. He said it with a smile, and he said it to the party, the way you include a room in a private observation. It got the laugh it was designed to get, the easy, following laugh of people who have been given permission to find something quaint. Clem's jaw tightened. He was watching. He didn't say anything. He is 18, and he lives in that house, and he has learned what I am still learning, which is when Garrett's mind is made up, the energy required to change it is more than the outcome is worth. Garrett held the box out toward the gift table. "We'll put it with the others," he said, in the pleasant, decisive voice he uses when he is not actually asking. "Give everything a home later." He set the box on the end of the table, away from the other gifts, which were in a grouped pile. The same way you'd set something aside that you'd already decided about. Clem looked at me. I looked back at him. I said, in the most ordinary voice I have, "That's fine. It'll wait. But I want to tell you what was happening inside me in that moment. Because I think you need to know it for everything that follows to make sense." I was not hurt. I was past hurt. I was standing on the other side of something I had been standing next to for 3 years, and I was finally seeing it clearly. Garrett had just put Roy's last project on the end of a table like a prop. He'd called it Rustic in front of 30 people and smiled while doing it, and not one part of him knew what he'd done, which was the whole problem. Not the cruelty. The not knowing. I walked over to the gift table at the end of the party when people were beginning to leave. The box was where Garrett had set it. Clem was nearby saying goodbyes, and I caught his eye and I touched the box, and I gave him one small nod. He excused himself and came over. "Open it tonight," I said quietly. "All the way. Feel along the inside bottom. Your grandfather hid something for you." He looked at me for a moment the way he's looked at me since he was small, like he is deciding whether to ask the question or trust me. He trusted me. "Okay, Grandma," he said. I drove home. I had pot roast in the slow cooker, which I'd done because difficult days still require dinner. I ate at the kitchen table where Roy used to sit, and I talked to him a little, the way I do. "The box is with Clem," I said. "The hard part is done." The phone rang at 9:30. It was Nora, she called, as she always does, and I thought she was calling to debrief the party, the way we debrief parties, cataloging what happened and what it meant, the way women do when they've lived long enough to know that what happens and what it means are almost never the same thing. She wasn't calling for that. Mom. Her voice was strange, quiet in the particular way that means something underneath it is not quiet at all. Clem opened the box. I waited. He found the floor, she said. He called me in. He was sitting on his bed with all of it spread out, and She stopped. Mom, what did Dad put in there? I took a breath. Sit down, sweetheart, I said. Are you sitting? She said she was. Your father bought stock, I said. A little at a time. Every year since Clem was 3 years old. He let it grow. The certificates are in the box, along with the account information. I paused. It's worth just over $60,000, Nora. The silence on the line had a texture to it. I describe it, but I don't think I can adequately. And there's a letter. I sealed. Addressed to Clem. Roy dictated it to me in the living room. It says to be opened at 25. And there's a note, unsealed, for the family for now. Roy wanted me to read it out loud when everyone heard about it. Nora made a sound I recognized from when she was 19 and came home and told me she was pregnant and didn't know how to fit that into the person she thought she was going to be. A sound that is not crying yet, but is made of everything that crying is made of. Garrett put it on the end of the table, she said very quietly. He said it was rustic. I know. He didn't know what was inside. No, Mom. Her voice broke on the single syllable the way a voice breaks when it has been carrying something for longer than it should have. Clem is in his room, and he is holding Dad's letter, and he keeps saying he knew, like he can't get past it. He keeps saying Grandpa knew I was going to need this. I put my hand flat on the kitchen table. He did know, I said. That's the point. I should tell you what those hours were like for Clem, because Nora told me later, and you should see it from his side. He'd waited until he was home and his bedroom door was closed. He'd set the box on his desk and opened the latch the way I'd showed him, and then he'd found the note I'd put inside the lid. Just a small card in my handwriting that said, "Feel along the inside bottom. Your grandfather left something for you." He'd pressed his thumb along the seam and found it immediately, because 18-year-old hands are better than mine at feeling what's there. The false floor lifted out in one piece. He sat there for a long time looking at what was underneath before he got up and went to get his mother. She came in, and she sat next to him on the bed, and he handed her the stock certificates one at a time, and she read the numbers, and he watched her face change. Then he handed her the sealed letter, and she held it without opening it because it said 25 on the envelope, and even at this moment she was not going to break her father's instructions. Then he found Roy's note, the unsealed one, the one Roy had written for the family for now. Clem read it first. Then he handed it to Nora. Then Nora sat on her son's bed at 10 o'clock at night and read her dead father's handwriting, and something in her that had been wound tight since the funeral, I think, finally had permission to come undone. She called me 20 minutes later. Now, I have to tell you about the days that followed, and I want to be honest about them. Garrett found out from Nora that night. She told me about the conversation in 2 separate installments, the way you tell things when the whole picture is too much to hand over at once. His first response was not, "I'm so sorry, I dismissed it." His first response was to reframe. He said he hadn't dismissed the box. He'd simply set it aside so Clem could open things at his own pace. He had said if anyone had told him what was inside, obviously he would have treated it differently, he said. And this is the part that Nora told me quietly, like she was ashamed of it. Well, how was anyone supposed to know? It looked like a trinket. It looked like a trinket. That sentence is Garrett in full, I'm afraid, not wicked. Calibrated entirely to appearance, and confident that appearance is the right instrument for the job. He'd seen a handmade wooden box and classified it correctly according to his system. The problem was his system. He did not apologize to me directly. Not that week. Nora apologized on his behalf, which is a thing she had been doing for 3 years, and which she recognized in the telling of it to me as something she was tired of. That recognition mattered. It was the first crack. I gave it a week before I asked them all to come to dinner. not a confrontation. A dinner. There is a difference, and the difference lives mostly in whether there is food. They came on a Saturday. Clem first, because Clem is Clem and he would not miss it. Nora with the look of someone who had spent a week deciding which version of herself to bring. Garrett in the blue jacket he wears when he wants to be taken seriously. And Phyllis, because Nora said she was going to come anyway, and uninviting her would have made the evening about that instead of what it needed to be about. I'd made a real dinner. Pot roast again, which is Roy's recipe adjusted over years until it's more mine than his, and biscuits from scratch, and a sweet potato dish that Clem has been requesting since he was 9. I fed them first. You don't do the necessary thing on an empty stomach. We talked about Clem's fall plans. He's taking a gap year and then community college, which Garrett had opinions about that he mostly kept to himself because Clem had made it clear he wasn't asking. Clem is new to the kind of clarity that comes from reading a letter from someone who loved you before you knew how to need it, and it has given him a particular quietness that is not shyness, it is direction. After dinner, I cleared the plates and brought the box to the table. Clem had brought it at my request. I set it in the center where a centerpiece might go. Garrett's eyes went to it and he looked away, which told me everything about how that week had gone inside his own head. I'd like to give Clem his grandfather's gift properly, I said, the way Roy asked me to. Before everyone, so everyone knows what it is and where it came from. The table stilled. I picked up the box and I opened the false floor slowly, so everyone could see how it worked, how well it fit, how you had to know or feel for it, and I drew out the contents and set them on the table, one by one. These are stock certificates, I said. Roy bought them a few at a time, every year since Clem was 3. Every birthday, every bonus, every good year. He let them sit because he believed in being patient with things that are worth being patient about. They're worth just over $60,000. Phyllis made a sound. Garrett went still. And this, I said, setting down the sealed envelope with care, is the last letter Roy ever wrote. He dictated it in the living room 2 weeks before he died. It's for Clem at 25. So that a young man who is going to need his grandfather in ways he can't predict yet will have a place to go. I touched the envelope. Roy's instructions to me were to put it somewhere Clem would have to find, to make it a thing, to make it last. Those were his exact words. I looked up. I looked at Garrett and I kept my voice the way I keep it in the workshop when a student has made a bad cut, and I want them to understand why without making them afraid to pick up the saw again. Even. Clear. Not unkind. This is what you held in your hands at the party, I said. This is what you called rustic. This is what you set at the end of the table. No one moved. I don't think you knew, I said. I want to be clear that I believe that. You made a calculation about what something was worth based on how it looked, and you were wrong, and the reason you were wrong is that you were using the wrong measure. Not a bad instrument, the wrong one. A piece of walnut doesn't announce what it's carrying. That's the whole point of building it properly. Garrett opened his mouth. How was I? You weren't supposed to know, I said quietly. That's Roy's design, not mine. He wanted Clem to find it. The only thing I'll say is this. When you looked at that box, your first thought was to tell people I had a hobby. I've been watching that thought for 3 years. And what it has been costing you is the ability to see what is actually in the room with you. The quiet that followed was not hostile. It was the quiet of a room where something true has been said in a space large enough to hold it. Phyllis said nothing, which was itself a kind of answer from a woman who always has something to say. Nora was looking at her hands. Then she looked up at me, and her eyes were doing the thing they have done since she was 4 years old when she is about to say something that is costing her. I've been apologizing for it, she said. Not to Garrett. To me. For 3 years I've been apologizing for things I didn't do and didn't think were wrong, and I've been telling myself that was keeping the peace. I don't think that's what it was. That was the bravest thing I'd heard in a long time. And it came from the person I'd raised to be brave, which made it feel like an answer to something I hadn't known I was waiting on. I let the room breathe. Then I told them what I'd arranged. The $60,000 is going into a trust for Clem, I said. A real one, formal, managed independently. It will be available to him at 25, the same age Roy wanted him to open the letter, because Roy was thinking about who Clem would be at 25, not who he is right now at 18. Nobody touches it before then. Not me, not Nora, not anyone. The money is his, and it will wait for him the way Roy was patient, with everything worth being patient about. Clem nodded slowly. He had been quiet through most of this in the manner of someone who has already done their crying and arrived somewhere past it, the same place Roy had arrived at the end. He always said that, Clem said. Grandpa. He used to say patience is just love with a long fuse. I hadn't heard Roy say that. Hearing Clem say it was like finding a room in a house, I thought I knew all the way through. I opened the second envelope, the short note, the one Roy meant for right now, and I read it to them. Roy's handwriting, his voice thin at the end but clear. If you're reading this, then Clem has found what I left him, and someone is making sure everyone in the room understands what it is. Probably Lenora. She always did finish the jobs I couldn't. I am not a man who says things twice, so I will say this once. That box was built by the best set of hands I ever watched work. Whatever you thought it was when you first saw it, you were short. That is on you to sit with. The money is a head start. The letter is a map. The box is proof that someone was paying attention to you, Clem, before you knew you needed it. That's the only thing I ever knew how to give that was worth a damn. Attention, paid in advance. Use it well, and be the kind of person who knows what something is before they decide what it's worth. All my love, Roy. Clem had his face turned toward the window. Nora was making no effort to stop crying. Even Phyllis, to her credit, had put her wine glass down and was sitting with her hands in her lap in a way that looked like it was costing her. Garrett was looking at the box. Not the certificates. The box. The dovetail corners. The brass hinges. The initials I'd carved in the lid. He said, and this surprised me because I had not expected it to come before the explanations and the recalibrations and the working out of how none of it was precisely his fault. I'm sorry, Lenora. I didn't know what I was holding. But I also didn't ask. That's a small sentence. It does not undo 3 years of little hobby and very rustic. But it is the beginning of a sentence, and beginnings are what Roy taught me to recognize. He was an accountant who thought like a builder. You look for the foundations. You check whether they're plumb. This one was at least pointing in the right direction. I told them what I wanted. I had thought about how to say it, and I had decided plain was the only way. I am Clem's grandmother, and I am not a visitor in his life. I will be present, I will be consulted, and I will be treated as someone who knows what she is doing when she is doing it. That is not a request, Nora said, Mom. Not a request, I said again kindly. Terms. No one argued with the terms. Here is what happened in the months after, because I know that's what you're waiting for. The trust is established. $62,000, as it turned out once everything was calculated. Roy had done better than he'd estimated, which would have pleased him enormously, and which he would have mentioned only once, and then never again. It sits in an account administered by a woman I found through the estate attorney, who has the particular competence and patience of someone who has arranged the financial intentions of cautious, forward-thinking people for a long time. Clem cannot touch it until he's 25. Nobody can. The sealed letter lives with the estate documents. Clem asked me if he could keep the box, and I said it was already his. He has it on his desk. He keeps things in it. Not important things, the small daily things. A ticket stub, a photograph, a piece of sea glass he found at the beach with his grandfather. The last summer, Roy was well enough to walk that far. The box does what good boxes do. It holds things until you're ready to look at them. Nora and Garrett are in counseling. This is not something she announced. She mentioned it the way you mentioned that you've started going to the gym, matter-of-factly, without defense. She is making different calculations about what is worth the energy of a scene and what is not, and those calculations are changing. I watch it the way I watch good wood respond to the right tool, slowly, with patience. You don't rush that. Garrett has not called me Lenora's hobby since the dinner. He asks Clem questions now that are not rhetorical. They are not close, but they are trying, which is the best thing you can do with a gap that opened over years of accumulated not quite seeing. Phyllis brought me a cutting board at Thanksgiving that she'd ordered from an artisan shop, clearly chosen carefully, and said she thought I'd appreciate it. I do appreciate it. I put it in the kitchen where I can use it, and I chose not to say anything about the fact that I could have made one myself, because she knew that, and giving it anyway was the point. Clem comes to the shop on Saturdays when he's free. He's been learning to use the router, which requires a patience he's still developing, and he swears at it sometimes, in a way that reminds me so completely of Roy that I have to turn away for a second and get myself back. He has Roy's hands, not the shape of them, the way of using them, careful before the cut, certain after. Last month he asked me to help him build something. A small cabinet, he said, for his room. He knew roughly what he wanted. He had thought about the joints. I asked him what he was going to put in it. He thought about it for a while, the way he thinks, all the way down before he answers. Things worth keeping, he said. The kind you have to look for. Roy would have said that was the whole lesson, right there. I think he'd have been right. If there is one thing I'd hand you from all of this, it's the thing Roy already said better than I can. Pay attention before you're asked to. The things that matter most in a room are almost never the things that announce themselves. They're the ones you have to slow down enough to find. The handmade thing, the quiet man with a legal pad, the box on the end of the table that someone already decided was just a trinket. Look harder than that. That is what we owe each other.